sometimes putting right, for those of you who don't know Rabbi or don't remember Rabbi Wilson from his time in Edgware, which seems that it was only yesterday, but I don't think it was. I think it was a lot longer ago. Probably around the time when we arrived in Edgware, actually. I think he moved out of Edgware, although shortly thereafter you were still here. Rabbi Wilson is currently, as it says on his thing, he's the executive principal of Beis Yaakov High School Academy in Manchester. And prior to that, he was the senior rabbi at Redbridge and then at Clay Hall. He's lectured at Jade, he's lectured at Osamer. I think, did you teach at Emmanuel? I believe you did teach at Emmanuel. Maybe mistaken. I think you did, because you used to drive. You used to drive a Sefer Torah there on a regular basis to accommodate davening there and at the Kollel. And of course, Rabbi Wilson was part of the initial intake in the famous Edgware Kollel that's been going from strength to strength for how many years now? Very impressively. How many years has it been going, Edgware Kollel?
It must be it's about 18, something like that.
Wow. Going a long time. It's amazing how now it's part of the furniture.
Yeah.
And for many years, Rabbi Wilson did give a shir in our house when we first moved here, a ladies' shir that was very popular and lasted for a little time after he left. He was succeeded by a number of other people, but it certainly didn't have it wasn't the same without Rabbi Wilson. I think he went through Perek Shira and various other things that people still talk about. I'm trying to remember that. Anyhow, without further ado and without further introduction, also Mazel Tov on your PhD, which I think, as I said to you when I spoke to you, it does now mean that you're eligible to be a Dayan of the London Beis Din, because we're always told you've got to have a Rabbi Doctor on the Beis Din, or a Dayan Doctor. So there is always a vacancy for you on the London Beis Din if you ever want to return south. And just again, before handing over to you, I want to wish your mother a Full Shlema, that please God you should hear good news from her.
Yeah, I mean, thank you. She's doing well. Well, Hashem.
Yesterday. She's doing well. Hashem, she'll be out for Yontif and be with you for Yontif. So we wish her a Full Shlema collectively. And without further ado, I'm going to pin you and pass everything over to you so that you can take over. We look forward to learning from you.
Thank you. Evening. So thank you for hosting me. Thank you again to Rabbi Wilkinson, Rabbi Allen, and Ruth for hosting me for many years in their home. I worked out it was 7 years. I think 4 years to complete 4 years to complete Derech Hashem, and then 3 years to complete Perek Shira. And those were very, very special shurim with a group of attendees that were really, really committed and thoroughly enjoyed it, and I grew from it tremendously. So thank you. The topic for this evening, and I'm going to share screen. I'm going to try sharing screen to share the sources. The topic for this evening is Rosh Hashanah. Can you game the system? I suppose I should start by saying that you can't game the system, but what we're going to look at is a number of sources that appear to be gaming the system, that appear to be loopholes or little tricks, perhaps that you might use to to gain a favorable judgment, even if when it comes to it on the day, the last 12 months has been the last 12 months. You can't change the past. We've done the aveiros we've done the mitzvahs that we've done. You stack them up on the scales. How can you change what you've done over the last 12 months? And what we find is a number of different sources, from the Gemara all the way through the sources in Halacha to the contemporary Mussar sources, as the things that we should be doing right now in these last few weeks or in the last few days, or on the day of Rosh Hashanah itself, that appear to be gaming the system. And I want to explain what these are, how they work, and explain perhaps why they're not gaming the system, but what they're actually doing is that when we understand what each of these sort of strategies are, they actually give us a deeper insight into how the system works. For want of a better word, it's almost like going meta. When you look at something that doesn't make sense, as many sort of sources in Chazal that the Agadic teachings in Chazal, when you look at things that appear not to make sense, you know that you're actually knocking on the door of something deeper, because you know that you can't read this, you can't take this at surface value, you have to go deeper. So I hope that isn't a spoiler to say no, you can't game the system, but I'm explaining what we're trying to do and looking at sources that that seem to indicate that you can. So I'm going to try to share the PowerPoint. Let's see how this works. I don't know if you can see that. The problem is that I now can't see you. Can you see me?
I can see you, but can't see the PowerPoint yet.
You can't see the PowerPoint either. Okay, so
we can see you.
Okay, so something's not working. So let's try again. So share screen. That one.
Can you select what you want to share?
If I share that now, now you can see something, can't you?
Yep, got it.
And now if I actually start the PowerPoint properly, I think that's working. Is it? Can you see the slide on the whole screen?
No.
What can you see? Just
we can see one. What you need to do is go to slideshow at the top. Put your cursor up to slideshow.
Yeah, I've done that. I've started the slideshow, but it's because I'm using two screens, so it's I don't know which screen
we can see what's on there. We can see it. We can see it. It just doesn't fill up the screen.
Okay, so we'll go.
It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. It's workable. It's workable.
Fine. So what we'll do is do is this.
I continue as you are. It's safe.
I will do. You can see it. It's fairly large. It's filling up most of the screen. There you go. So if we'll start with the first source. The first source is we say in Rosh Hashanah Musaf, Olam, Hashem, you remember everything that happened. You look and you consider everything that ever happened. Everything that happened, all that is hidden, you can see it. Nothing is forgotten in front of your throne. Nothing is hidden from your eyes. And this is a statement that everything at the beginning of Zechronos in Musaf, that Hashem is looking at every single act that we've done. There's no way of hiding everything. Everything is going to be scrutinized. And so this sort of sets the tone for Rosh Hashanah of saying, there's no way around this. There are no tricks. There's no sort of causing Hashem to look away, to sort of overlook any of our averos. However, the first, if you like, sort of trick that we're told, which appears to be sort of gaming the system, is the way Shulchan Aruch tells us to approach the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. Obviously, we're told to sort of take this time to consider our actions, to reflect, to do teshuvah. And the example that's given, and I'm not going to go into detail on why this example, but it gives an example of something that perhaps people aren't particular about during the rest of the year, which is pasakum, non-Jewish baked bread. That people have the minhag to be particular about it during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. And this is a very strange thing, again, without going into why the Shulchan Aruch picks that example. But during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, do a little bit more. You know you're only doing it during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah. You know you're only saying slichas during these 10 days. We know that we're only sort of reflecting on our actions during these 10 days. But somehow these small acts, these small sort of token acts, are supposed to make a difference. Next source is this. The Gemara in Brachos says the following: the Malachim said to Hashem, Rabbanu Shlomo, the Torah says, Hashem who doesn't show favor and doesn't take a bribe. That's in Devarim Perek Yud. In Bamidbar Perek Vav, it also says, Yisa Hashem Panavelecha. Hashem should turn his face towards you. Hashem should show you favor. So what's going on? Which one is it? This is what the Malachim, this is what the angels ask Hashem. Which one is it? Is it that you don't take a bribe, you don't show favor? Or is it that you do show favor? So Hashem responds in the most puzzling way. Amalahem, Hashem responds to the angels, Yisrael. When I not show favor to Israel, when I wrote in the Torah, that when you are full, having had a filling meal, that's when you have a mitzvah to bench. Right, and they're particular to bench even when they've only had a kazayas or a kabeta of bread, which is a small amount. If you think about it, if you have a slice of bread, you have a small sandwich. I suppose everyone's version of a small meal is different, but you have a small sandwich, and it's a kabeta of bread, and we bench. And the Torah says you only need to bench when you're full. You might not be full as the Torah describes, but we. Right, it says Hashem, how can I not show them a favor when they go beyond the letter of the law and say Birchas Hamazon even when they've only had a small amount of bread, right? So somehow, this itself is puzzling. This is itself is self-contradictory, and it's another source that seems to say that we're sort of gaming the system by by benching when we've had on a smaller amount than the Torah actually requires us to do. Now I'm going to turn to another source, a medrash, which is extremely puzzling, and it goes like this. This is talking about how Moshe, after the sin of the golden calf, how Moshe speaks to Hashem and asks Hashem to forgive the people. And Hashem says there these words that we constantly repeat throughout Slichas and on Yom Kippur. I will favor those who I will favor, and I will have mercy upon those whom I will have mercy. So the Medrash describes a conversation between Hashem and Moshe when Hashem takes Moshe on a guided tour. And here's how it goes. But Osashah, at that time, so this is when Moshe is on Har Sinai, in between the first luchos being smashed and going up to receive the second set on Rosh Chodesh Elul. So this is somewhere in between 17th of Tammuz and the 1st of Elul. At that time, Hashem showed Moshe many storehouses of reward that are set aside for the righteous. And Moshe said, who's this one for? Moshe looks at this kind of storehouse of reward. I don't know what a storehouse of reward looks like, can't picture it, but this is what the Medrash describes. And Moshe looks at something, can see this is sort of immense reward, and he says, who's this one for? And Hashem says, this one is for people who excel in doing mitzvahs. And who's this one for? This one shall megadli yisayimim. This is for people who do particular acts of chesed. They raise orphans or they fund orphans. And every single one of the many storehouses of reward that Hashem showed Moshe, each one Hashem says this is the reward for this particular these particular sort of set of good deeds. This is the reward for this particular set of good deeds. After that, after they'd been through all of these, they saw this huge storehouse of reward. Amar, and Moshe says, who's this one for? Who's this one for? To which Hashem replied, Amar, whoever has of his own, I give him from his reward. Whoever has earned reward, I give him. Whoever's earned it, I give him from the reward that he's earned. Whoever doesn't have any, I give him free. And I give him from this one. So if you've earned reward, you get from those incredible treasure houses of reward for all those different mitzvahs. But anyone who hasn't earned the reward, I give him from this one. I give him from my own. I give him from my own as a free gift. Shneimar, as the pasuk says, I will show favor to those whom I will show favor. To those who I choose to show favor, and similarly, and I'll have mercy on those whom I have mercy. And this is referred to as the Oitza Matnas Chinom, classically, as the treasury of unearned gifts. And the question obviously being twofold. Question number one, if at the end of everything you get the reward anyway, even if you haven't earned it, then what's the point of doing mitzvahs? What's the point of trying? Now, what's the point if you get the reward anyway? What's the point of trying? If at the end of it Hashem says, well, well done to those who earned it, but those who don't worry, because really I wanted you to get the gift anyway. Here you go. What's the point of mitzvahs? Number two, if somehow there is some sort of treasury of unearned gifts, how can we get our hands on it? How can we get our hands on that treasury of unearned gifts? What do we have to do to get it? If Hashem says, I will show favor to those who I will show favor, I will have mercy upon those whom I will have mercy. Anyone who has this sort of chayin in Hashem's eyes will merit this to take from this treasury of unearned gifts. There's a root connection, by the way, between chayin and chinom. Chinom meaning free, and chayin meaning well, chayin as we call it, favor or grace in someone's eyes. Because when you favor someone, when they have chayin, then you give them something chinom. There's a root connection. What do we do? How do we get our hands on this treasury of unearned gifts? So the first question, I'm not going to answer in detail, save to say that the judgment on Rosh Hashanah is always there. The reward and punishment of the world to come, of the afterlife and the judgment, is always there. But the way to understand this medrash is this is referring to reward that Hashem gives to us in this world, even though or even if we're not worthy, to sustain us, to keep us going, to make sure that we even those who haven't earned it have what we need to keep going, to keep experiencing life, and to have the opportunity to carry on doing good things in this world. So it's not that those mitzvahs that have been earned are just ignored, right? They are extremely valuable. There's a time when we're given the reward for those mitzvahs that we've actually earned. But even if we haven't earned those mitzvahs, even if we're not deserving, then Hashem shows us favor and shows us grace and gives us things for free. But the question is, how do we get our hands on this treasury of unearned gifts? And I'm going to come back to that and explain it. So far, it may appear that I'm sort of going through different sources and not answering or explaining everything, but hopefully it will all come together and we'll have it all wrapped up by around 8:45, so we can put the kettle on and have a cup of tea afterwards. But we'll do our best to pull it all together. Next is a Gemara. The Gemara says as follows. Gemara speaks about, as we know, when it comes to the judgment of Rosh Hashanah, immediately we're judged on Rosh Hashanah. There are three categories. Person is judged as a Rasha. That's it. It's clear that he's wicked. We think of the scales, right? The scales. We'll talk about the scales shortly. The demerits on one side, the merits on the other side, right? If the demerits, if the averas, the sins outweigh the mitzvahs, then that's it. He's a Rasha. If it goes the other way and the mitzvahs outweigh the averas, then he's a tzaddik. But if he's 50-50, if he's in between, then the scales look like that. And then what do we do? And then we're told that then the judgment is held until Yom Kippur. And he has the Aseres Mitzvah from Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur to make a difference, to make a change. The Gemara says something slightly different. Rav Chesed. We describe Hashem in the 13 attributes of mercy as being Rav Chesed, right, of abundant Chesed. What does that mean? It means, says Beis Hillel, Hashem is Mata Kalapi Chesed. When the scales are equal, Hashem has the casting vote, if you like, and pushes it towards the side of Chesed. Gemara says, Hechi Ovid, how does he do that? And here we've got two opinions in the Gemara. Rabbi Eliezer says, Koiv Shoy. Now, that means like this. You got the scales, they're equal, right? You want the one side to outweigh the other. There are two ways of doing it. You could either make one side lighter or one side heavier. Rabbi Eliezer says Koiv Shoy, which means he overpowers, he places additional pressure on the side where the mitzvahs are, and that goes down, and that outweighs the Averis. Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina Omer, it's the other way around. Noise, he lifts, right? He raises up. No, like the pasuk says, Noise Ovin v'Aver al Pesha. He raises up the iniquities, takes the Averis, raises them up, somehow makes that side lighter. Or if you imagine putting, as it were, a hand on the scales, on one side, either to weigh the mitzvahs down a little bit, or putting a hand underneath the basket on the other side to mean that the Averis rise a little bit, right? Take a little bit of the pressure off the scales, off the central point of the scales, and it goes that way. I was reflecting on this Gemara a few weeks ago, and it was something that I've never really sort of come across before or thought about in any detail. And I thought immediately, I don't know what any of you think, and you're welcome to sort of chip in here, but this is one of those Gemaras where you can see straight away there must be some incredible depth hidden here. There's something hidden in this Gemara. There's something hidden in this Gemara. We're not playing games here that we have scales, and if we tip it one way, then what? So you tip it one way. So scales, you got mitzvahs on one side of various, and you tipped it. So what? Hashem tipped it, but Hashem is judging. So who's he fooling? If you had somebody else judging it that couldn't see the sleight of hand and you moved it, then you'd achieve something, right? If you could move it so that the person looking at the scales and who was keeping the score hadn't seen that your sleight of hand, right, then you'd be fooling someone. But Hashem is the judge, and Hashem is the one that's tipping the scales. What does this mean? And then on top of that, what's the if you like, argument between these two opinions here? Or what different aspect is each of them saying? Any thoughts? Anyone? Is everyone able to unmute or yeah, feel free. I don't know if anyone wants to say anything or if no? Okay. So I'll tell you how I understand this, and there are different approaches to it between Rashi and other sources and the Maharal, and there's a Gemara in another Gemara in Erechin that brings it, that seems to have another twist on it. But I'm going to explain it in a way that is sort of inspired by, I would say it's inspired by the way the Maharal of Prague explains Rashi, but it's not exactly what the Maharal says. There are two ways of looking at the Averos and mitzvahs. One is to give those mitzvahs a bit more weight. The other is to give those Averos a little less weight. What do I mean by that? The Rambam says that, I'm going to show you this source here. Okay, Rambam says like this. Rambam says that he's talking about the three categories of the Rishayim, the Tzadikim, and the Beinoni. Okay, and the Beinoni is the one where it's 50-50. And he says, Mechza leMechza, right? Imagine the scales, if it's 50-50, that's a Beinoni. Therefore, and the Rambam speaks about this at length, and he says at the end, right? Lefikach tzorech kol adam shira atzmai. I've got this highlighted. Kol hashana kula kilu chetziyai zakai v'chetziyai chayav. This is how you have to imagine yourself, not just on Rosh Hashanah, but the whole time you're thinking, imagine yourself, where am I on these scales? Right? Where am I on these scales? Constantly imagine yourself as being in a 50-50 position. And imagine that the whole world is similarly in that position. If you do one Avera, then you can tip the whole scales for yourself and even the whole world. If you don't do one mitzvah, you can tip the scales for yourself and even the whole world. Now, anyone will tell you that sort of mathematically, this is highly improbable, right? That of all of the Averas and all of the mitzvahs in the world, if you add them up, that it's going to be 50-50. Never mind thinking about the whole world. Is the whole world in a 50-50 state? But let's just think about the individual. What are the chances that if you add up the mitzvahs and the Averas that we've done over the last year, that it's going to be 50-50? What are the chances? What are the chances of that? It seems to be almost impossible. How do you weigh those mitzvahs and Averas anyway? So on that, the Rambam says in a little bit of this that I've not quoted here. On that, the Rambam says that these are not simple calculations where one mitzvah gives you 1 point and one Avera gives you one negative point. Each mitzvah and each Avera is weighted differently. And only Hashem knows the weight of each mitzvah and each Avera. Only Hashem knows the weight of each act that we do. We could do a mitzvah and it could be a fairly lightweight mitzvah. We could do an Avera, it could be a lightweight Avera. Or we could do a mitzvah and it could be weighted very, very greatly. And the mitzvah that's weighted greatly might be something that's very simple and doesn't cost much money. It might be that it's weighted greatly because it was hard for you to do and your doing it showed a great desire to do Hashem's will, right? Or it might be weighted heavily because when you did it, you put so much kavanah, so much thought into it, you put your heart into it, you connected with Hashem so deeply by doing it. Either way, who knows the value or the weight of any individual mitzvah or Avera? When you think about it in those terms, it starts to become possible that it's 50-50. And to explain this further, the idea is this. A Beinoni is not simply someone who is weighed, has an equal number of these sort of items on the scale. A Beinoni is a way of being. Some people are Rashayim. What does that mean? It means that their service of themselves is more important to them than the service of Hashem. Yes, occasionally they might do a good deed. Yes, occasionally they might do something to assuage their own conscience, or they may pay some lip service. But in essence, the whole way of being is serving themselves. A tzaddik is someone whose whole way of being, whole approach to life, whole purpose in life is guided by serving Hashem and doing Hashem's will. And yes, the tzaddik may occasionally, as someone who's a tzaddik may occasionally make mistakes, may occasionally do Averos, right? But if his whole goal in life, his whole focus is to serve Hashem, then that's his way of being. A Beinoni is everybody else. The way we understand it is that there are a few Rashayim, there are a few tzaddikim, but most of us are Beinonim. I remember, must have been about, I would say, sort of, about 17, 18 years ago. We were trying to remember, Rabbi, when it was that we first came to Edgeware. I think it was round about then when Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman came to visit London, and we went to meet him. And it was the Aseret Yimei Teshuvah, if I recall correctly. And during the Aseret Yimei Teshuvah, in the build-up to Rosh Hashanah, what do we wish each other? Right? You should be written and inscribed for a good year. During the Aseret Yimei Teshuvah, between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, what does everybody wish each other? A Gemara Chasima Tova, right? You should be signed. You should have a good. You should be signed for good. So Aaron Leib Steinman said, actually, when you think about it, The Gemara says the only people who are actually already written on Rosh Hashanah are the Rishonim and the Tzaddikim. On Rosh Hashanah, where the judgment is clear, someone's clearly a Rasha, the ruling is already written on Rosh Hashanah. If someone's clearly a tzaddik, the ruling is already written on Rosh Hashanah. For most of us, we're in the middle. Most of us are in the state of Beinani. If that's the case, the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah is the time where we're still working, and we're only going to be written finally if we merit, we'll be written for good on Yom Kippur. So therefore, even during the Aseret Yemei Teshuvah, we should still be wishing each other Ksiva v'Chasima Teva, because we haven't been written yet, assuming that we're a Beinani. The assumption is that and I don't know everyone who's on this call or who you will are, so you'll forgive me if I've got this wrong, but the assumption is that every one of us is a Beinani. Okay, if you're sure no one's a Rasha, if you're a tzaddik or a tzaddikes, then that's between you and Hashem, and really you should be giving the share next time and tell us how you did it. But we're assuming that every one of us is a Beinani, and a Beinani is a state of being, and that state of being is that we're constantly constantly struggling between serving ourselves and serving Hashem. Constantly struggling between the two. When we serve Hashem, we're doing it with absolute sincerity. Our mitzvahs are real mitzvahs, but at the same time, we can't break out of that kind of service of self. We can't break out of that sort of pattern of we serve Hashem and then we pull back, because what about my own needs? What about me? The things that I want. And so the Beinani, which is what we all are, really is the sort of genuine good person whose mitzvahs Hashem loves, but who is in many ways constantly underachieving. Right? In some way, we're underachieving. Our mitzvahs are really, really valid mitzvahs. Our averos are things that we're pulled to do because of the human condition, because of the Yetzer Hara. But we're kind of underachieving because we're always floating between these two. And that's how it's possible to have these scales evenly weighted, because Beinani is a state of being. And if you understand that each mitzvah and each avera is weighted based on where your heart is at that moment, right? If your heart is connected to Hashem through the mitzvah that you're doing, you're expressing that through the mitzvah. Or if the avera that you're doing is your Yetzer Hara, your service of self, or your own needs and wants, pulling you to sometimes do things that are wrong, or not go the whole way in serving Hashem, going as far as we could do, then that is the state of Beinani. And the Rambam is saying, therefore, if that's the state of Beinani, how do we get out of it? With one single act. One single act can change that, because it's constantly in the balance, because that is our natural state. Our natural state is of being in the balance. That's our state of being. Therefore, in one moment, we can change that. In one moment, we can swing it. And what we're trying to do, right, is not tip the balance by putting one extra mitzvah on, but tip the balance by changing our own state of being and who we are. To take this further, it strikes me that you have, on the one hand, what the Rambam says, that we've got to look at the scales as being right here and recognize that any action that we can do, with one action, we can shift it. And on the other hand, you've got the Gemara that says Hashem is going to shift it. Right? Hashem will shift those scales. How? Either by pushing one side down or by lifting the other side up. Hashem's going to do it. And these two things go together. In that, the one prompts the other. Right? Our action on the one hand to tip the scales, if you like, that what you call an isrusa de latata, a kind of awakening from below, from in this world, causes an isrusa de laela, a sort of awakening or a stirring in the higher realms, where Hashem responds by doing his part in tipping the scales. What does it mean? Right. The one question that we're sort of left to try to explain is, what are these two views on how Hashem shifts the scales? What are these two views? One is to give extra weight to the mitzvahs. The other is to give less weight to the averos. And I want to answer this with the following. This pasuk in Yeshaya, Perek Mem Tes, it is one of the haftorahs for of the last few weeks. One of the haftorahs that we read between Tishrei and Rosh Hashanah. Forget which one it is. It might be Akev or A. And it opens with these words: Hasishkach isha ula mirachim ben bitno. Does a woman forget her child? Right? Will she not have mercy on the fruit of her own womb? Right? Gam eila sishkachno, says the Navi, says Yeshaya. Even these things could be forgotten. Right? Even a mother could forget her child. Right? Va'anochi lo yashkachech. But I, says Hashem, I will never forget. I will never forget my people. And that's the simple translation of it. The Gemara says something really quite amazing here. Some stray words there. Yeah. Did you see that live editing there? Yeah. Did you see the word disappear from the screen? Yeah. The Gemara says something, an incredible explanation on this pasuk. It says, Eila and Anochi refer to 2 times in the history of the Jewish people. Eila refers to to do it the other way. What does Anochi refer to? Anochi, right? Where do we hear the word Anochi? Anochi refers to Hashem giving the 10 Commandments. Hashem giving the Aseret Dibros. And Anochi was the first word of the Aseret Dibros, which we ourselves heard, which we stood there and heard Hashem, every single one of us heard Hashem speaking to us and saying Anochi Hashem. So Anochi is the word that is that moment where nationally, where as a people, we had, every single one of us had an unbreakable connection to Hashem. Eileh refers to the time in history, just 40 days later, when the golden calf was made, and when Moshe Rabbeinu hears them saying, Eileh Elohecha Yisrael, look at this calf, this is your God, these are your gods, Israel. So the Gemara says like this: Hashem is saying to the Jewish people, I will never forget. I will never forget you. You're always in my mind. I always care about you. I always love you. I always bring you back, however far you stray. Amr Lefonov, right? The Jewish people. This is Knesset Yisrael. It's in the feminine. Says to Hashem, Rabbeinu Shlomo, Master of the universe. Since you never forget, since Hashem never forgets, maybe you won't forget the averos that we've done. Maybe you won't forget the sin of the golden calf. On my law, so Hashem says back to the Jewish people, Gam Eileh tishkachno. No, Eileh, I will forget. I'll forget Eileh. I'll forget. I can overlook the sin of the golden calf. Now, forget obviously doesn't mean that Hashem in His memory forgets that it happened, but it means I can wipe that out. Amar Lefonov. So we responded, Rabbeinu Shlomo, if you can forget, Shema tishkach li ma'aseh Sinai. Maybe you'll forget the connection that was built at Sinai. Amar lo, so Hashem says back, V'anochi lo yashkachech. I'll never forget Anochi. So Hashem is saying in these words that Yeshaya is saying poetically to Klal Yisrael, Hashem is never going to forget us. Hashem is never going to forget us. But there are 2 different occasions in the history of Klal Yisrael. One is the moment of greatest connection, if you like, the moment of mitzvah. The other is the moment of greatest distance, if you like, when a person does an avera. And nationally, the moment of greatest connection was when we stood at Har Sinai and heard Hashem speak to us and say Anochi. Nationally, the moment of greatest distance was when we stood 40 days later and danced around the golden calf and says, Eileh Elohecha Yisrael, this Israel is your God. Hashem says, the Anochi, the moment of connection, that can never be broken. But the Ada, the moment of distance, when we distance ourselves, that can be overlooked or forgotten, or if you like, at least mitigated. That can be mitigated. Now let's go back and think about the scales, right? And this is, as I say, sort of inspired by the way the Maharal describes this, although it's not exactly how the Maharal explains it. When Hashem looks at these scales, on the one side is the mitzvahs, on the other side is the averos. The mitzvahs represent our connection to Hashem. The averos represent our distancing ourselves from Hashem, deciding to serve ourselves instead of serving Hashem. Hashem looks at these two sides and says, one of these is real. One of these is incidental. Which is the one that's real, that's deep? The connection that is forged through the mitzvahs is real and everlasting. The damage that's done by the averos is incidental. Therefore, when we look at this as being 50-50, and we understand that Beinoni is a state of being, where am I? Where is my heart? Where is my head? Beinoni is a state of being. And with one act and with the thoughts and the feelings that come into that one act, I can change the whole dynamic. Hashem says, I can do the same thing. I can take the mitzvahs and give those mitzvahs so much weight, because those mitzvahs, the connection that you built with those mitzvahs, they're real, they're everlasting. The Anochi will never be forgotten. And at the same time, I can take the averos and say, those averos aren't real. They're not really you. They're incidental. You have Yetzer Hara. You are pulled to sin by the human condition. They're not really you. Therefore, if they're not real, they're not really part of who you are, then suddenly they become less weighty. They become less weighty, and the mitzvahs become more weighty. Because in the real analysis, the mitzvahs are real. They're deep. They are eternal. The averos are incidental. They are superficial, and they can be wiped away. So, I'm not going to be able to sort of perhaps cover everything that I wanted to cover. But I do want to sort of wrap up and answer some of the questions. Questions that we posed at the beginning are, what are these symbolic acts of doing something different during the Aseret Teshuvah? Whether it's not eating Pasakum, right, non-Jewish bread, whether it's the Gemara that says Hashem shows favor to us because we will bench after even having a small amount of bread. What do these things represent? What do these symbolic things represent? The answer is that this isn't a bribe to Hashem. This isn't asking Hashem to change the scales because let's just put another mitzvah and put another coin on it, and it another small weight, and it tips the scales. What we're trying to do is shift the dynamic of who we are. And we shift the dynamic of who we are so that we recognize that the mitzvahs are who we are, and they're real and they're deep, and the averos are incidental and they're superficial. Then Hashem responds in kind and shifts the scales in the same way. The other point that we've touched on to wrap up on in all of this is, we spoke about the treasury of unearned gifts. How do you receive from the treasury of unearned gifts? Right? What do you do? Where do you get this chen from? Where do you get this chinom? What do we do that gains favor or grace in Hashem's eyes? And the answer to this is on this last slide here. There's a pasuk in Mishlei. From the leitzim hu yolitz v'alanovim yitain chen. He scoffs at scoffers, but to the lowly he shows grace. Right? If you come someone who comes with humility, then that creates a sense of chen, a sense of grace. If somebody comes and scoffs, or if somebody comes and is haughty, if somebody comes and demands with a sense of entitlement, then that receives nothing in response. The way that we approach Hashem is with anova, with humility, and you see that this is a theme that runs through the slichos. The opening lines of Slichos, we come to you, Hashem, not claiming that we've done great deeds or amassed numerous mitzvahs. We come kedalim ukaroshim, right? We come like poor and hopeless people. Dafaknu dolasecho, we knock on your door. Dolasecho dafaknu rachum v'chanon, we're knocking on your door. Rachum v'chanon, Hashem, who is merciful and gracious, right? As we said before, we want Hashem to show mercy and grace, right? Who does He show mercy and grace to? How do you achieve that? Don't send us away. How do you achieve that? By coming to Hashem with humility. And that's why you'll notice numerous times throughout Slichos. And once you've heard this, hopefully, if you remember, you'll never be able to unhear it because it's so powerful. Every time we introduce the Slichos, we introduce the Yud Gimel Midas, Hashem Hashem Kel Rachum, those 13 attributes of mercy. We introduce them with the words, as you made known to Moshe Rabbeinu. How do we refer to Moshe Rabbeinu? As the Onov, like you made known to the humble one. How do we introduce every time these attributes of mercy, which are the very things that are going to gain us favor in Hashem's eyes? As you made known to the humble one. We can describe Moshe Rabbeinu in any number of ways, as you made known to Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe, our teacher, on Sinai. No, these 13 attributes of mercy you made known to Moshe, who is the humble one. And so we come to you, Hashem, with humility. We never come to Hashem saying that we are entitled. Right? We come to Hashem saying that please give us please show us grace. So the answer is the way to earn from the way to merit, to take from the treasury of unearned gifts is to come and say, I don't deserve it. To come and say, I'm asking you for an unearned gift. And I'll finish with the following. I have a few more minutes just to finish off. Is that okay? Yeah? I'll finish with the following. A really incredible mashal from the Dubna Maggid. In a particular town, there was an extremely wealthy man. And he had a daughter who was a very fine girl of marriageable age. And somebody made a shidduch with the poorest person in town. Now, I don't know much about Shadchanos or how it works, but I know that that's not a usual thing. I don't know what the Shadchan was thinking, right? But apparently the boy was a very, very good boy, very, very good boy. And the wealthy man agreed to the shidduch, thought this boy was suitable for his daughter, suitable match for his daughter. When they sat down to discuss the wedding arrangements and who would pay for the apartment and so on, the two mechutonim, the wealthiest man in town and the poorest man in town, sat down and they discussed the arrangements. The wealthy man, so the wealthy mechuton said, look, it's okay, I understand. I've been blessed. Shem's blessed me with great wealth, and I understand your circumstances. He says, don't worry, I'll take care of it. I just ask you to make some contributions so that we should be partners in this. He says, and 5% is all I ask you for. You pay 5%, then we'll have a share in it, we'll be partners. And as the old saying goes, what's 5%? Well, what's 5% depends on obviously what it's 5% of, and it also depends on what your means are. For this gentleman, 5% of the cost of setting up this shidduch, for obviously the wealthy man's daughter and her new husband to live in the manner which she had become accustomed, was a lot of money. Yes, it was only 5%, but it was a lot of money. But he agreed to it. He says he thought the principle behind it was good, that he should be a partner. And off he went to try and raise this money. And he knocked on doors. He asked everybody who he could. He spoke to every member of his family, his friends. And, pennies, he raised a little bit more, a few pennies. And the deadline, the date that agreed by which he was going to raise his money, the deadline was coming closer. And he didn't have much to show for it. Finally, it gets to the very day that's the deadline when he's supposed to be coming back with these funds. And he realizes he's nowhere near. Absolutely nowhere near. He's not got the money. So here's what he does. He goes to the mechuton. He knocks on his door. And the mechuton opens the door and he says, mechuton, how are you? He says, look, I'm not here as your mechuton today. So what do you mean? He says, I'm here as a poor man. And you're here as a wealthy philanthropist. So I'm trying to raise money for my daughter's wedding. It's what's called hachnosas kala. And I need, I need the funds. I need the funds. I've been going around trying to raise money for my daughter's Hashanah. I need the funds. Well, that's the moshel. I mean, if it helps you, we can finish it off with a happy ending and say that the wealthy Mekutan gave the money, and and the shidduch went ahead, and everyone lived happily ever after. But that's the moshel. The Maggid says this moshel explains exactly what happens in our relationship with Hashem as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah, as we prepare for this judgment. Hashem has made some requests of us. It's things that Hashem wants us to do, right? We owe him. Where are we going to get what we need to pay him back? And the answer is we ask him to give us what we need to pay him what we owe him. And he does. He gives us what we need to pay him what we owe him. And that's the treasury of unearned gifts. And the only way that we can merit that is by coming and saying, I'm not coming as your Mekutan. Right? There's two roles here between you and me, between Hashem and me. One role is that we're Mekutanim, we're partners. We're partners in building the world. And Hashem said, Nase Odom, right? Let's make man. Hashem said that in the plural, meaning me and man together will make man. Me and man will build the world together. We're partners. We're Mekutanim, right? We bring Kiddush Hashem into the world. We bring light into the world that Hashem has designated for us to do. It's our task. We're partners in building this world, us and Hashem. At the same time, we do our work as partners. We do what we need to do. We do all the things that we've spoken about before in tipping those scales. At the same time, we turn to Hashem at the same time and say, Hashem, we're doing our bit to tip the scales. But now I'm turning to you as a poor man turns to a wealthy philanthropist, to his benefactor, and says, I'm turning to you in that way. Now you're gonna do your bit to tip the scales. We're turning to Hashem and saying, you have this treasury of unearned gifts, right? We know that we've done some mitzvahs. We know that we've not always got it right. We're not asking on Rosh Hashanah for very strict judgment because we know we won't be able to stand up to that. But what we're asking is for everything that we need to carry on and keep going, to have another year, to keep going, to keep trying, to keep growing. Hashem, you've got that treasury of unearned gifts. We turn to you and ask you for it. But the only way to turn to Hashem and ask for it is as an onov and an oni, the words being obviously having the obvious root connection. An oni being a poor person, an onov being a humble person, turning to Hashem and saying, here we've got nothing. We couldn't get you and get together our 5%. Right? If we turn to you and say, we know that we're asking for an unearned gift, that's how we merit to receive from the treasury of unearned gifts. So I hope that what I've explained, I'm happy to take questions or continue any discussion. I hope what I've explained is that this isn't about gaming the system, rather, but this is about understanding more deeply what Hashem wants of us. And every single thing that appears to be a strategy or a trick, if you like, or a loophole, is actually, when you look into it more deeply, is sort of, as I said before, it's like sort of going meta to a sort of higher level of understanding, really what it is that Hashem wants of us more than anything, as we build up to Rosh Hashanah. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's see if I can hold on. Oops. You came back. I don't know if there are any questions, but I love the moshel. I really love the moshel of the Dubin Magnet. I think it's a very powerful idea for us to take with us into these last few days before Rosh Hashanah. And as you say, Anavanani, we have to be there. That's how we have to go. And indeed, not only we count as that, we count as sheep, we count on various levels, but it's a matter of digging deeper and seeing so much more. And as always, I'm so grateful for you giving time to us. So many years you've spoken in this house, and to hear you speaking again in the house is an absolute privilege and pleasure for us. I wish you and your family, Kasiva Simtova, a good Kaventia. You should be healthy. As I said before, the mother should have a Rosh Hashanah. And please, you get much nachas from your children. It's just so lovely to see them grow and see you develop, and wish you hatzlacha with everything you're doing. Please, God, we will welcome you back into Edgeware next time you come to Edgeware. And I do know you do occasionally visit Edgeware, but maybe you will wander over to the far side and visit our shul and speak to us in person. But again, thank you so much for speaking tonight.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. It's really inspirational. Thank you very, very much.
You'll definitely listen the lady.
Thank you. Really interesting. Thank you.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Thank you.